transitioning to more adulthood or early adulthood. So college, it sounds like you moved to San Antonio,
To Austin,
to Austin. I apologize. How was Austin? How was
the
that?
center of the universe. Oh, Austin was wonderful. And I studied physics and I had a wonderful time. I didn't know what sexism was because um, we only had a class of 10 people and we would hang out together and work on homework together. And I was no different from the guys. We just all hung out together, and the professors treated me very well. And when I went to graduate school, I went to England, and uh, I was the first woman in that lab, and
Wow.
they reminded me of that. And they would tell each other, "Oh, we have a new computer." I knew that the lab had ordered a computer, and when the computer finally came in, it was a month later before they even told me it was there. And they were just, I had never experienced that in my college. So it was a strange experience. And then, of course, going to work at Exxon and Mobil, there was a lot of sexual harassment.
I can imagine for
And
women's, yeah.
yes, and I didn't even know what to do. I didn't feel empowered to say anything about it. This would have been in the 1980s, and and I didn't say anything about it. So I appreciate the Me Too movement. I'm glad that women are speaking up
Yeah.
because I remember I had organized a symposium on lab automation and invited speakers from academia and industry. And we went to dinner. And at the dinner, one of the speakers kept saying out loud, sitting next to me, "Come back to my hotel room and let's have some fun. Come back to my hotel room. Come, aren't you going to come back to and out loud." And I
Wow.
was just trying to ignore him. Like, okay, I'm not even going to answer this, and ignored him. And one of my colleagues was across the table from me. And the next day, when I saw my boss, he said, "Ben told me last night about this person, um, and he'll never be invited here again." And I thought, if Ben saw that happening, why didn't Ben come around and take him by the hand and say, "I'm calling a cab for you now, take you back to your hotel." And
Yeah.
and so even the men there didn't feel empowered to say something about it. So times uh, times have changed some, but I have a daughter who's a mechanical engineer, and
Okay.
she suffered very similar experiences with the men around her. And one trying to get her to go to his hotel room, and she said something
Mm.
to her boss about it, a man, and he said, "Oh, I'm going to speak to him. That will never happen again." But
Mm.
then he said something to HR, and HR said, "Oh, this is not your place to speak to him. This is an HR matter." And so they completely disempowered him.
Yeah.
And then when she received an award, somebody even asked, "Was your name put in because of a request for sexual favors?" I mean, it still goes on. That was just a few years ago.
Mm.
So there's still work to be done in this world.
Yeah.
And it's too bad. She actually thought of leaving engineering because of it, because it's so frustrating.
That is
And
tragic. No one should be have to face that decision of leaving a job that they like because of external forces.
exactly,
Mm.
exactly. So I totally commend the women who have come out with the Me Too movement. I've been tempted to write my own letter to Exxon and Mobil. And I thought, maybe I could cash in on it, but I am not going to sign a non-disclosure agreement
Yeah.
because I think those are wrong. So I just go on talking about it.
I I commend you for that. I think the more we talk about it and more people are aware of it, the more we can actually start realizing that it's a bigger issue than isolated incidences that we believe it to be.
Yes. And and there's just something about the women always being the evil one. I know we've spoken about this before,
Yes.
you know, and
It's the default is
it's
that they're wrong, unfortunately.
and it's interesting watching Nikki Haley run against Trump, and and all these comments about Nikki Haley's clothes, and it's like, seriously,
Yeah.
can we stop talking about Nikki Haley's clothes? I think it would be a little different in England. You know, they have had women leaders, and they have the royal family
Yeah.
about whom they can talk about their clothes. You know, what did Kate Middleton wear? What did so and so wear? What did Queen Camilla wear? And that takes a little bit of the importance of clothing off of the political leaders. But here in the
Right.
United States, our political leaders are our royalty also,
Yeah.
or, or
So
not.
to backtrack a little bit, I'm curious to know what made you decide to go into physics? Was it your father being an engineer had a role that you went into STEM?
Oh, I loved physics.
Okay.
I love the idea of being able to explain the exact reason why something happened, and even taking it down to understanding the stochasticity of events. And I felt I didn't even take biology because our biology teacher in high school used to give spelling tests, and I said I'm not going to take biology. And I took chemistry, and I thought, but chemistry really is explained by physics. So basically, physics and math explain things, and I want an understanding of how things work. Now, my family had always planned for me to go to medical school.
Oh,
My
okay.
my great grandfather was a physician. He came from England. Um, he married 3 times, and his third wife was my great grandmother. She came from Mexico, and their daughter, Mary, my namesake, or I'm her namesake, became a physician. And she was, in
Mhm.
fact, the first female Hispanic physician in South Texas. And she married a physician. And then the next generation skips. And so my father kind of planned out all our careers for us. My brother was going to be an engineer. My sister was going to be a pharmacist. And I was going to be a physician. And I went and studied physics, and I loved it. And I did apply to medical school, but I also applied for something called a Marshall Scholarship.
Mm.
And I tell people, go look it up. We Marshalls don't like saying, well, it's kind of like the Rhodes Scholarship, but Rhodes, at least at the time that I applied, did not allow women to get a Rhodes Scholarship, did not award Rhodes Scholarships to women, and they required you to have a sport. So
Oh,
we said
interesting.
the Marshalls always accepted women and never required a sport. So we're the truly intellectual scholars. and and anyway, I went to England for 3 years, and I compromised by getting a PhD in biophysics. And when I came back, I said, okay, I'll go to medical school. And then I decided, no, I think I want to be a scientist. And so I worked for a couple of years in academia and then in industry. And I think what I found for somebody like me who's interested in knowing how things work, and then after I know how they work, I'm done. I don't need to know all the details. And getting grants is about figuring out a detail that you don't know, how you can find it out in 3 years, and further the field along, and write up this proposal that has existing data for it. And I said, I want to attack the unknown. I want to do something more exciting than move things on a little bit at a time. And so I ended up working in industry, in the oil industry. And one of the things I will say that I liked about it was that you could write a proposal that was very innovative, and they'd say, you know, that's an interesting idea. Let's try that. And they were willing to try it. What I didn't like about it, aside from a certain amount of conservatism, was that at the end of a year, before you were finished, they might change their mind. Say,
Mm.
well, you know what? that was something we were doing to explore how well we could crack uh, heavy oils, and we don't want to do that anymore. Now we want to work in this other area. And we're giving up. We're selling all our interest in solar, so no more solar projects. And so you could put in interesting ideas, but you didn't always get to continue them through the interesting part. The other thing that happened while I was at Exxon was I was in a computing group, and we were called a service group, and we would do projects for other research groups. You want this problem solved, we'll work on
Hmm.
it. And along came an engineer who said, I think we need a new model for our cat cracker in the refineries. Our old model is just based on a number that you multiply by the refractive index of your incoming oil. And we're getting oils from all over the world. It's no longer this sweet crude from West Texas. So I said, we should try a mechanistic model. And that's what I had done for my PhD is write mechanistic kinetic models. And so I said, we don't have to write an equation for every entity, but we can group them. They're the aromatics, they're the long chains, and we can actually analyze them in the incoming oil to see how much of these different parts they were, fractionate them, and then fit our coefficients to this. And initially, this group went to the mathematics group, and the mathematics group said, "Oh, this can't be done. We're not going to do this." So they came to our group, and I said, "Sure, I'll work on it." And sure enough, it worked. And one of my male colleagues working on the project wrote an internal paper about it,
Hmm.
and he left my name off. And he was like, "Oh, yeah, sorry, I just wrote it in a hurry." Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, "But you didn't even have a model about me." and and then it was getting a lot of interest as maybe something that should be applied in the refineries worldwide. And then the math group said, "Hey, we can't have the computing group get credit for this." So we have to take this project into the math group. So and also another one of my colleagues put in these notations of ideas, and the idea is that you have written and had somebody else sign and date when you first had an idea, so that this may eventually become a patent, and you've declared this as your idea
Hmm.
on this date. If anybody else challenges that, and he left my name off of it, and so I this guy was sexually harassing me. And I was just like, this is it. This is crazy. And so I went and spoke to one of the lawyers at Exxon. And he said, here's the problem. If somebody challenges Exxon's ownership of a patent, because when you go to work for them, you signed on your contract that you will not keep any rights to any patents or any
Hmm.
income. So if Exxon patents this and you're not at Exxon and you challenge them, you can actually get an award, a part of the patent. So to protect them, we need to look into this. And so he said, we're going to look into this. And in the meantime, I was being recruited by Mobile, which was at the time a separate company. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to go work for Mobile. I need to get out of here. So I went in and I said to my boss, I'm going to go work for Mobile. And I guess since I never worked on that cat cracking model, I can work on cat cracking at Mobile. And I went back to my office, and I had given him a 2-month notice. And I did this on purpose because he came back and said, pack your stuff and leave today. And I thought, that's exactly what I wanted, 2 months of paid vacation. So I went to England to visit my friends, and
Nice.
came back and went to work for Mobile. And the Exxon engineers, I mean, the Exxon lawyers came down to talk to Mobile, and they said, "You have somebody working for you, Mary Edgerton." And usually, when somebody goes from one of those major oil companies to another, they have a professional courtesy agreement that the person will not work on the same things they were working on previously with the other company for 5 years. And the lawyers from Exxon came and said, we want to make sure that she does not work on it for 10 years. And Mobil said, we've never had to agree to 10 years, you know.
Hmm.
And so as the lawyers were hashing this out, Exxon announced from its headquarters that it was laying off 25% of its personnel worldwide.
Oh
And
no.
I think it ended up being about 75% of the personnel in the research area. So all those people were without jobs now. And so Exxon forgot all about it. Anyway, it was kind of a funny thing, but I will tell you, it's been a recurring theme in my life that somebody says, no, I'm not going to work on that. That's too complicated. And I say, let's try, just kind of build something up. And the men come in and say, oh, that's mine now. So I went to work for Mobil and eventually ran into the same story. And I said, maybe I just need to do something completely different. My MCATs are good for 10 years. That's the medical college admissions test. And I'm coming up to my 10th year. So maybe I'll go to medical school. It had been my parents' plan. And in fact, when I was young, they said, you go to medical school and you should become a pathologist because they don't do anything. Perpetuating the myth. You'll be sitting, you won't have call. It's not true. You won't be busy. Not true. um, and so it'll be a good career. And so I went to medical school and I said, I am so tired of money and I'm so tired of the culture of money and competition and so on. I'm going to go become an internal medicine doctor and I'm going to deliver babies on horseback in North Dakota and get paid in chickens. I don't even want to touch money. I don't want to know about it again. And I'm not going to do science anymore. I'm done with all that. But as I went through medical school, the field that I was most attracted to was pathology. It is the most scientific of the fields. It's an attempt uh, not only to diagnose disease, but to understand its etiology and the mechanisms behind it. So as I went through medical school, I just it was my favorite subject. And in my final year, I did an elective in cytology. And I went and did a year of internal medicine. And I said, I have two little children at home. I miss them. I miss pathology. I miss knowing what's wrong with the patient. I mean, I get a patient and the rule of medicine, if what you're doing is working, keep doing it. If it isn't, change. And above all, never hand your patient to a surgeon. So, so I'm there and I say, I don't even know what these patients had, except that they got better and they left. And so I decided, you know what? I'm going to switch to pathology. And I
How was
did.
it? How was it raising a family while going through med school? And I'm assuming you had children while you were working in your previous life as a petroleum engineer.
Well, so I actually uh, I worked with engineers, but my title was actually as a senior research physicist.
Okay.
But I did not have children at that time, and I didn't have children until I was in my fourth year of medical school.
So you're trying to add to your challenges.
Oh my gosh, what can I tell you? So and my husband at that time had two younger children, the boys. The boys were 10 years, or each 10 years. Each one of the boys is 3 years apart. Each one of my girls is 3 years apart. And the boys are each 10 years ahead of another girl. So it's like Groundhog Day.
Sounds like it.
I said, so I've got these three boys through and now I have my own children and it was very tough. And my parents were quite a bit older at this time
Hmm.
and and they weren't anywhere physically close to us. We were living in the Northeast. My two girls were born in Philadelphia. And my husband's parents had both passed away. So we just did not have any help. And we couldn't afford an au pair. And I don't know that I wanted an au pair. I did manage to hire a nanny, but it was very challenging. And it hurt a lot when my sister and my sister-in-law would say to me, well, it's obvious that you're not the number one parent. And I was like,
Mm.
you know what? My husband, now that I've switched to pathology, my husband is working the same hours that I am. I mean, I'm there from 8 to 5. And I made a point, unless I was on call, of if I needed to do some work or studying, I would do it at home. I would write up an autopsy report at home. So I wouldn't go back into work. I would stay at home and see my children. And uh, and so he, and I would take care of him in the morning. He would leave early, and then he would come back early and take care of them in the early evening, and then we'd all be together by dinner time, bedtime, and the weekends I would be at home, and I would give him uh, some some time off. So I would go grocery shopping, and I would take the kids with me,
Mm.
have time together, and it just really hurt to have them say, and I'm like, and so why does Mark get to be the chief parent when we've got a balance going here? And
Yeah.
he's not spending any more time with them than I do. He just has a different time of the day, that he has. And um, that's something that still bothers me if they bring it up. It's like, mm-mm.
Maybe it's a jealousy thing.
I I think so. I mean, for my older sister, she's I described her in a story that I was telling of my older sister. It's like if you have a children's dictionary and it says concentration camp director, there's a picture of my sister. You know, she runs everything. And my sister-in-law, I think, she gave up her career to stay home with her children.
Mm.
And so, I mean, how could I have both? So, um, yeah. And they haven't walked in my shoes.
Yeah, that's
So,
true.
they can't really say it. And I have a really good relationship with all four of the children, even though I'm not married to their father anymore. In fact, I'm going to call him my son, my oldest son, Justin, and his two little boys. And it's amazing having known Justin as a child, and he was a very active child. He wasn't easy to raise. And seeing him with his two little boys, he's amazing.
That's good to hear. But I mean, it sounds like the your day-to-day life is fairly busy
My
between
day-to-day life.
med school, end of med school, residency, and then coming home to children and maintaining a family and a household. That's not an easy task for a single person.
No, I came home one time and I was making dinner and I was calling to everybody to come to the table to eat, and nobody came. And I pulled up my old I hadn't had my youngest daughter yet. I pulled up my oldest daughter's high chair and was feeding her. And I used to sit at the head of the table and and then I'd go back in the kitchen seat. And I just moved down to another seat, put her beside me, and I said, I resign as mother. I'm done. I'm done. And my stepsons were pretty shocked at this. I guess the younger one was 7 when this happened. And he said, and I mentioned it to him one time. Now he's in his mid to late 30s, and I mentioned it to him maybe 10 years ago. And he said, oh, I remember that day. I remember it vividly.
The earth stood still.
Yes, yes. And then when I would study for the boards,
Oh,
it was really hard. And I was thinking, I'm going to go from here to a job. And I I will never have as much time as I have now to study. And I started listening to tapes, and I never listened to tapes. I blame it on my mother because she made me go to church every Sunday, so I just tune out. And the way I keep my attention to a lecture in a lecture is to take notes.
Hmm.
And so when I was driving into work, it was about a 30 or 40-minute drive. I would actually play a tape of somebody, speaking on, some board topic. And I was thinking, I've never done this before, but I'll take any point I can get. If I get one from listening to this tape, I'll take it. And my younger son, the younger of the two boys, would sit down with me and I had index cards. And it was cute. He would ask me questions and I would answer and he would check them. And so he helped me, go through these cards and so on. And that really was a big help because I needed somebody to do that with me. And then I remember one night going up to bed and telling my then husband, if I don't pass the boards, I'm never going to take them again. And he said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. I'll work in construction. I'll do anything but be a doctor. I am not going to take the boards a second time. And once I took the boards, I said, I'm never going to take an exam again. I, if I have to take a driver's test, I'm just going to hire a driver. But things change. I did take another board exam. I'm certified in clinical informatics also, and but I have to help Derek. Those were nice nights when he sat with me on the sofa, and he was all of 7, but he could read. Uh, blood banking. Who runs blood bank? No, no, actually, he was older by then. He was 7 when I started the residency, so he was 12.
That's
And
cute.
yeah, yeah.
What is the what is a day in the life of Mary look like now? It sounds like very different than the early days of your budding career.
Oh, it's wonderful. Look, I'm drinking some tea. I'm talking to you. I have a radio show that I'm a rotating host on. So, what's your story? I go to the Moth and tell stories. I go see movies. If I decide I want to go to New York, I plan a trip to New York. Last summer, I went on a hiking trip in South Dakota and North Dakota with a friend of mine. She loves to go to
Nice.
national parks, and I said, "Well, let's go together, and we'll go hiking." Went to Teddy Roosevelt National Park, which is actually a great park, and she planned the trip. She said, "Oh, I love to do this kind of planning." I said, "Sounds perfect. You just tell me where to make my reservations, flight reservations to and from, and I'll follow you." And she's a
If
very much a morning person, so she said, "I'll drive in the morning and,
oh,
and I'll drive in the evening."
it worked out.
It was perfect. Yeah.
If we backtrack maybe let's say 10 years ago when your days were busier, what is the day in the life of a pathologist look like if you were to tell someone what that looks like?
So so we'll have to. I'm gonna take you back to when I started at MD Anderson,
Okay.
and I set out to do informatics and to work on their biorepository uh, enterprise software and do breast 25% of the time. And over time, there were more and more um, breast cases, and the breast service became busier and busier. And a new guy came in to be the head of research IT, and he wanted to take over the
Hmm.
biobanking, which he did. So I became a full-time breast pathologist. And it was right around 2012 that that happened. And I was disappointed because I liked my life of about 70% informatics and 30% breast pathology. And I found I was just doing more and more and more and more and more breast. And I said, I'm working harder than I worked as a surge path fellow.
Hmm.
My kids were grown by then. So I said, I'm in on the weekends. I'm here late at night. I'm working 60 to 80 hours a week, probably 60 hours a week on average. And I did not work that way as a resident, or I certainly didn't do it in the office. I had to
Hmm.
be in the office to look at the slides. And so I just said, I can't continue this. I'm going to retire at 65. And I went and I told my section head, I'm going to retire at 65. That's going to be in a few years. And she said, oh, no, 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 stay till you're 70 and da da da. And I'm like, mm-mm-mm-mm-mm. Well, one of my children came back home to live with me. And so I needed to go on working. So I was like, okay, I'm going to retire when I'm 67. And I told my retirement advisor, get ready. I'm going to retire when I'm 67. And he said to me, you can do whatever you want, but don't take any money out of your retirement account because the market is down. And the worst time you can start taking out of your retirement account is at the beginning of your retirement period, because
Hmm.
that impacts all the extra interests, et cetera, that you would have earned along there. So you can do anything you want, but you just can't take money out. So I said, okay. And then this wonderful opportunity came up. Someone that I knew at MD Anderson had accepted a position as chair in Nebraska. And he said I could really use somebody to do some informatics from within the pathology department. Um, and there's someone here named Scott Campbell, who's an informatician who's very well known
Hmm.
uh, for ontologies. And I love doing ontologies. I mean, we get down with it, and it's like, is perinurium equivalent to nerve? Can you use nerve, the code for nerve in SNOMED for perinurium? And I said, no, no, but is the perinurium part of the nerve? Well, it's part of the nerve, but, and I said, think of it as the bark on the tree. The bark is part of the tree, but this is the bark. And he's like, Mary, you're winding me up. And I said, it's two people, two OCD people who are going at it on, is the bark part of the tree or not, and or should you define it, should you call it out separately? And we finally he came back to me a few days ago and he said, so I talked to some other colleagues and they decided they were okay with leaving this as nerve. And I said, well, this is not the fight I'm going to fall on the sword for. And I guess that if the beetles got under the bark, what you're afraid of is that they're going to get into the tree and kill
Hmm.
it. So when you're in the perinurium, what you're really afraid of is that your tumor is going to get into the nerve, and then it has a highway to where the nerve comes from, your spine or your brain. And so I'm going to let this one go.
You got to choose your battles.
Yes, yes. So at this point, I've taken this position in Nebraska, and I spend a week a month on breast pathology, which translates into about 30% of my time. There's leftover stuff. It's a it's a busy week. I'm working on cases all day long, uh, and there can be 10 or 12-hour days, um, and uh, it's not quite the same as it was at MD Anderson, because at MD Anderson, all my big cases were cancer cases.
Hmm.
And here I would say 30 or 40% of my big cases are cancer cases. And I might get 25 biopsies in a day at MD Anderson. And here on any one day, I'll get 10 biopsies. So it's a smaller load, it's very doable, and it keeps me doing something that I like to do. I like pattern recognition, and
Hmm.
I like having, let's say, a kind of safe haven to go to where I I begin and end something. It's complete. Whereas when you're working in informatics, you can start designing a project,
Hmm.
but it's not going to end this week. It will take longer. So this way I get a little bit of my life to do some beginning, middle, and end within a finite amount of time, and then another part of my life to think big. So I like it.
And
And
then in general, how would you describe the field? Like in terms of if you were to simplify, I guess, how what a pathologist does on a daily basis, how would you describe from morning till their till the end of the day, what are they doing? If you can walk us through that.
yes, and that's a great one, because I'll tell you, people in general, I think even physicians recognize radiologists as credentialed people to read images.
Hmm.
And I don't think that recognition exists for pathologists. So when I look at the definition in the US CDI, which is the United States Core Dictionary, initiative, or core data initiative. They define diagnostic imaging reports as reports based on an interpretation of an image by a credentialed professional. And they describe laboratory reports as values generated by a test to say
Mm.
something clinically about the patient. And they say nothing about the credentialed professional. And in fact, every laboratory test requires pathologist input. So let's say I'm doing pattern recognition. I come in, I pick up my slides, I look at them under a microscope, I work on distinguishing the normal from the abnormal, uh, saying, what this patient has, why did they get this biopsy? Or I might have to say, there's nothing in this biopsy that explains what you think you were looking for. And I recommend, I have a line for it, clinical reexamination of the patient with re-biopsy if clinically indicated, meaning you might have to go back. You might not have been in the right place. A patient's treatment plan starts with what I do. So I have a very, very important clinical role as a breast pathologist. So if I think you have cancer, I say so. I keep going back to cancer, but that's a large part of my work. And I tell you how aggressive it is. And when you resect it, I tell you how far it's spread and whether it's spread into the bark of the tree or the perineum of the nerve. And you you base your decision on how to treat the patient on what I have told you. And so I'm a very important person. And I don't think I'm recognized as such. And I have to know there are certain gray areas. A lot of people say, oh, this is just, a textbook and AI could do this. And it's no, there are gray areas where there may be a tumor which is invasive and looks like it might behave less aggressively or more aggressively based on the criteria that I give it and the way I bend it. And sometimes I have to pitch my comment to the physician to say, I'm concerned about this one. So if you're on an in between and whether or not to give them a, a more aggressive therapy, think aggressive. Or I'm going to pitch this as, you know what, even though this overall tumor size looks like a T2, 75% of it is a lower grade, 25% of it is a higher grade. So it's not quite the stage and grade you think it is. So I'm making these kinds of decisions of how to word this so that the clinician knows, oh, now I know. There's a certain language that's fixed that we use called the stage, the grade, the histology, and then there are the nuances that I give it. And it actually, one of my mentors in pathology told me, she said, anybody can learn pattern recognition, but learning how to tell the clinician something is a very, very important part of being a pathologist. And so this is true.
What do you
Now,
think the,
oh,
sorry, I was going to ask, what do you think the distinction between radiology and pathology is? You said that we don't get the same recognition as them. Why do you think that is?
I wish I knew. I think somehow somebody might look at an X-ray, and let's face it, uh, many clinicians in the care of a patient, whether it's an internist or a surgeon, will look at an X-ray. But they'll be hard pressed to get the nuances out of it, and they'll be looking at the report
Mhm.
and getting the final word from the radiologist. They don't look at slides all the time, you
Mm.
know. Um, so when I was in internal medicine and we rounded on patients, we saw their X-rays. We rarely went to see their slides, and so you don't think of that part of it. And then the other thing that would happen is certainly some of this would happen in radiology also. Chart records were paper, and this was the 1990s, but charts were paper. and you'd write your assessment and plan or your history and physical, and you'd go to the radiology section and look at their report, and you would transcribe it, and you'd go to the pathology section and look at their report, and you would transcribe it. So when this USCDI first came out, it initially defined a pathology report as a narrative as interpreted by a specialist taking care of the patient.
Hmm.
So it's as though when I was in internal medicine, I went back and read that report, and then I summarized it in my history and physical. Now, that's not really the way it works anymore. Now that we have electronic medical records, more people are looking at the PATH report. And to tell you the truth, when USCDI came out with its first version, they said the same thing about a diagnostic image as interpreted by a specialist caring for the patient. And now I have a feeling that radiology actually was involved in upgrading their uh, definitions such that it reflected their specialist practice. And we pathologists haven't done the same thing for ourselves. And in fact, I put a proposal out to say I think we should actually redefine the laboratory test reports as lab values as interpreted by a credentialed professional in this field. And it, some people might say, well, when you look at the chemistry values, like the sodium level and so on, you're really getting something that's spit out by a machine. But I happen to have a person in the office next door to me who's a chemist, and I constantly hear her getting calls about, do you think this drug might have interfered with this sodium measurement? And so that's why this sodium looks low, or is it really low? And as a chemist, she has to know what those interactions might be and where the technique that we're using for measuring something might be affected and give a wrong answer. And the internist doesn't know that. The
Hmm.
chemist knows that. So we're constantly making interpretations in this fashion, even when things are coming off of a machine. And all day long, I hear things. The blood bankers, it's fun to listen to. For 17 years, I was on a floor with just anatomic pathologists, surgical pathologists, and now I'm actually on a floor with blood bankers and chemists, and you're calling for whole blood. And well, we have a shortage of whole blood. And when I told somebody about this, they said, whole blood? What is whole blood? I said, whole blood is the blood as it comes out of your body. And normally they separate it into the red blood cells and the plasma, and they give those separately. But when you give whole blood, you give the whole thing together. And so it's a really interesting field. It's one where you really are critical to the care of the patient. You're making decisions that affect their life, and you're making them without somebody who's given you an answer from before.
Mhm.
Like I tell the oncologist, yes, this is cancer, it's this grade, it's that grade, and it's like, okay, you've told me, now I can go do this. But I'm saying, well, I see the radiology, it's an image, but sometimes some cancers are occult and they don't show up on the radiology imaging. And I'm going to tell you that it's this cancer and it's this big. And so we really are important. We don't get reimbursed as well. There's part of reimbursement is something called a technical component, which is the part that says, okay, you have a laboratory that takes the tissue sections that your pathologist has cut and what we call fixes them. So it kind of freezes, if you think about it in a chemical way, the proteins and the DNA in membranes in a certain place. And then you cut a very thin slice and then you stain it such that these things will come up with different colors in a range between, usually in general, between pink and blue and all the mixtures in between. And then a pathologist looks at it. So the technical component pays for the slides and the fixation and the cutting and the staining, and then the professional component is the interpretation. Many times Medicare has come out and said, we're not going to pay the professional component. And it's like, are you kidding?
Mm,
Who's going to read your slides? How are you going to know? And in fact, right now, the California Society of Pathologists is suing a set of hospitals who have decided that they're not going to pay the professional component. And it's like, so you're going to get the slides. Who's going to read them? Who's
yeah,
it? And I think people don't understand that I sit there and I wrestle with something, you know, is it, and there are a lot of mimics to cancer, and I have to wrestle with them. And there are instances, like I say, where I have to know what you think you were looking for, because if I tell you, hey, it's nothing here, it's completely benign, and you had actually biopsied the wrong area,
mm,
then I'm actually medically legally liable. So I have to know what you think you were looking for. You were looking for a lump. Do what I have in front of me enough does it explain a lump? If it doesn't, I need to tell you that it doesn't. And I get some of those every week, and I teach my new residents. I said, this is a paragraph you need to learn that you'll be using for the rest of your life, like radiologic pathology correlation. This does not explain a lump. You need to re-examine the patient, and you might even need to rebiopsy them, and that could save their lives.
what do you like about your job? I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of pros and cons. There's a lot of things that you like. It seems like the intriguing part of it is the problem solving. But is there any one particular thing that you like the most from
Well,
your
one of
job?
the yeah, one of the reasons I went back to pathology is from internal medicine is that, like physics, okay, chemistry is a manifestation of the physics. The physics explains it. And with pathology, I can see the beginnings of this, the predecessors of this, the preceding lesions, and how this developed. And I can look at mechanisms. Is it dividing quickly or slowly? And that's what makes it. And so I find it's a much more mechanistic field as a part of medicine. So for several reasons, I like doing things for people, and I'm doing something for people. I'm helping let them know what they have, or let them know that that lump was benign, that
Mm.
it's fine. And I'm also getting into like, this must be why this is happening. Look at this person's background of tissue. I think there's something that predisposes them to something. And then, of course, we have more finesse methods of determining that, of looking at the kind of genes that predispose to certain diseases. And if you have that gene, what manifestation might you have? And you can learn something new every day. I had a patient's liver biopsy come in, and they said, well, she had breast cancer a couple of years ago. So we
Mm.
think this is breast cancer. And I looked at it and I said, well, she had a very low grade small breast cancer. And this is very ugly looking. I don't think this is the same thing. And it turns out she had poorly differentiated neuroendocrine tumor.
Oh, wow.
And uh, and it turns out that she had a genetic predisposition that was known to predispose to breast cancers, but actually has been associated with neuroendocrine cancers also. So I thought, gee, this case taught me something about how the broad impact of this mutation has that it has on the patients. And so it's and it's something new every day.
What is something that you don't like about your job?
Oh, I don't like the paperwork.
That's a common theme in all of medicine.
I don't like having to take um, the tests on preserving patients' um, um privacy. I've taught the field, and I feel like I really should get some advanced credit for this. For having taught in that area and keeping up with it. Or can I skip the online lecture part and just go straight to the exam part? And do I have to do it every year? And why do I have to be credentialed when I get credentialed every year? Why do I have to fill out the form from the beginning of my life to now? In
Hmm.
fact, I wrote a letter at MD Anderson one day. I meant it to be a little tongue in cheek. And I said, you know, I studied physics and I know that you can change events in your past timeline. You can access your past timeline. The only caveat is you have to be traveling faster than the speed of light. And we're not doing that on a regular basis in the pathology department now. So why, when we get credentialed, do we have to keep filling out all this old information and add on new information? And it was probably about 6 or 7 years before they said, oh, you know what? We're going to store this old information in a database
That's a smart idea.
and pull it out. I was like, see, told you. But I think the bureaucracy is
Mm.
tough. I think the insurance, health insurance model in the United States is flawed and it's not working well. We have some of the best medicine in the United States, and yet it doesn't show up in terms of our statistics, in terms of length of life, or in some cases, maternal fetal mortality, because a lot of people aren't getting care. So you can have the best care, but if it's not available to everybody, what does that mean? And and when people would argue with me and say, I don't think I should have to pay for health insurance, I would say, you pay for car insurance.
That's a good,
And
very good
you never
point.
think about paying for car insurance. And you stop at stop signs, you
Yeah.
know. Uh, it, how can you, deny that health insurance is very important? And those countries that have recognized it recognize that a healthy population is a good thing for a country. It's good for its
Mhm.
economy. It's good for its defense, if you want to go down that road. And and a happy country is a good country. It's a good makes it a good place to live, and a
Yeah.
healthy country contributes to that. So I think our insurance system really needs overhauling. I'm of the mindset that, or opinion that it's the healthcare insurers who are making a lot of money. And although physician salaries are high and so on, and hospitalizations are high in cost, your insurance premiums are even higher, and they go higher, and the hospital gets paid less, so that the insurer gets a lot of the pie.
To
So
to
that's
be on a positive note slightly, having you're in a very unique position in a few areas. One, you've seen a very small rural town, and their access to healthcare is completely different than a large metropolitan city. And then having lived in various healthcare systems in the US versus in Europe, how has that changed your understanding of the healthcare system in America, and how has healthcare system in America in general changed and evolved? Do you think it's going in a more positive direction or a negative direction overall?
I think it's going in a negative direction.
Okay.
The Medicare budget is fixed. The
Yep.
defense budget is not. And so if they decide that they want to pay internists more for maintaining a healthy population, then they had to find someplace else to cut it. And all the other doctors are fighting. And for some reason, pathology seems to be a popular place to cut it. And I think some of this goes back to this lack of recognition of what the lab is like. I
Uh,
very much admired one of my fellow medical students who told me that she did a rotation in pathology because she knew that she would be ordering these tests and she wanted to know how they were performed. And I actually think that a pathology rotation should be required, because on one side, people argue about unnecessary testing. Well, if your medical students were better trained in pathology, they would know better how to decide how a test should be ordered or which test should be ordered and so on. And they would also understand the importance of the pathologist in driving the treatment and care of the patient. So I advocate for uh, a 3 month rotation, 6 months in laboratory medicine, clinical pathology, and 6 months in anatomic pathology. And
Oh.
if you were looking at those slides with somebody and knowing how hard it is to decide what a patient may have, and if you need more material,
Mm.
then you would appreciate that professional component. You might even say to your patient, well, I'm going to take this biopsy and I'll see what the pathologist says instead of come back next week and I'll tell you what you have.
Mm. How do you feel the field is headed in pathology? Like where do you see the direction of the field growing? Where do you see the shifting tides, if you will, of the field?
Well, I think that computing will have a large influence. I don't think it'll have the magical, the computer is going to decide everything because there's still a heuristic in saying, okay, 25% of this tumor is very high grade. Is
Oh.
that enough to really affect this patient compared to the 75% that's low grade? What nuance do I throw on this? And I don't think AI is nuanced enough. Not to mention, I've tried some of and you have too, the large language models, and they get kind of sloppy. Oh, you had it in millimeters, and I was thinking of how to assess it in centimeters. Okay. And then they're sometimes a little too smart for themselves. Well, the average liver is 15 centimeters across, and you said that your tumor's in the center and it's, 8 centimeters. So that leaves 7. So I think it's 3.5 on either side. And I'm like,
Wow.
no, no, uh, don't take upon yourself determining what my margin is.
Yeah, there's definitely room to grow, but I do think I agree. I think there's a component of artificial intelligence to enhancing workflow, or at least expediting some of the workflow that we do that's more mundane or rudimentary.
I
Yeah.
agree. And I tell everybody, I said, you can do all the pattern recognition that you want, but if I still have to dictate my report, that is what takes me the longest time.
Yes.
It's getting through, the limb system to get that dictated at frequently the longest time. And if you're not addressing that, you're not really making this turnaround any faster. You're just taking away the fun part of my job.
Yeah.
So make sure that when you do this, that you add on automating how to order extra tests that emanate from this for the care of the patient, and then leaving it up to me to say yep or no, because I still am the credentialed expert. And I might disagree with you,
How do you
especially.
feel? I mean, I completely agree. I think there's a lot of room for improvement with AI, but the counterpoints to this would be there are certain companies out there that have done pattern recognition, and I believe one of them in the prostate is actually FDA approved for pattern recognition. So some might say there's a tried and true, if you will, uh, system out there that does this. Can it be implemented elsewhere?
I I still think at this point that a human needs to decide. And I'd like to know, are you going to sue the machine? Are you going to sue if the diagnosis is wrong? Are you going to sue the machine? And is the machine always able to make a diagnosis? It's not always clear that uh, that you have prostate cancer or not. A lot of the time it is, but when it's not, you really need somebody to look at that. Yeah, my day would go faster if AI was stacking up my cases saying these I think are cancer and these I think aren't. And I'm going to order these biomarkers for medicine on these. And then I might know I need to order some stains on these. And it's all ready for you. Take a look and see. I'd love that. But I don't think uh, I don't know if people have realized that the rate limiting step is the ordering of the extra tests and the and getting the report written.
Before we dive down into the AI ethics debate, I love artificial intelligence. It's a passion of mine. You're very well versed in it. That's a conversation for another day, especially the ethics of artificial intelligence pertaining to healthcare, which I'm definitely planning to discuss with you at a later time. Um, so on a side note, and going back to the field as overall, do you feel like pathology offers a good life balance for people that have families such as yourself while going through the training? And then afterwards, do you feel like there's a good life or work-life balance? Do you think it exists in the field?
Yes, although again, it's going to depend on if you're the only pathologist and you're overworked. Yeah, you're not
Mm,
only uh, not doing anything for your patients, you're not doing anything for your life balance. So it also depends upon the reimbursement model and whether the pathologists are getting enough of that or whether they're having to run very lean as a department to run in the black.
mm.
Uh, and so that's a message I think that we need to get out. If they are running optimally, I love it. I think it's great. I am on call from time to time, so I can't leave the area, but um, I'm it's I think about one weekend a year for me,
Wow.
and uh, in at MD Anderson it was one weekend a year, and that's okay. What I did find at MD Anderson because the workload was so high and they really didn't have enough people was that I couldn't take vacation. There weren't people
Mm.
to cover me, and I I said I've got to be able to take some time off, you know, from time to time and go do something else. I think it's a very rewarding field because you really are doing things for people and you're exercising your mind. I think that medicine overall is becoming a more quantitative oriented field with the
Mm.
entry of many computational products within the medical domain. And for that reason, I think undergraduate education should emphasize quantitative topics, computer science, mathematics, statistics, and I don't think we need organic chemistry anymore. I I think it's a small group of people, my colleague next door, who use that organic chemistry, but in general, a physician uh, is not using their lipid metabolism in their day-to-day job. So I think we could get rid of organic chemistry as an undergraduate course
I
and
mean,
biochemistry
I've had
as
to learn the Krebs cycle so many times, and I would learn it, memorize it for an exam, and then I would forget it shortly afterwards. So I'm in line with that train of thought, but I can also see someone seething right now that I'm saying this and saying, how would I not appreciate the nuances of the Krebs cycle or the electron transport chain? Or how certain medications inhibit the transport chain, and that's why everything arises like bad in the cell. So it's a very
I'll give you the Krebs cycle, just to take
yeah.
out that metabolism.
Transitioning to your life overall, is there certain things that you regret from your past?
Well, Edith Piaf said it very well when she said, "Je ne regrette rien." I regret nothing. And I think when I went through periods of my life and I regretted things, I regretted not studying physics and astrophysics. Um, that leads to a lot of unhappiness. Um, there is one thing I continue to regret that I didn't stay with my first love. I mean, first or my main love of my life. I think I misinterpreted some of the things that he said, and I was in a place in my life where I would turn my back on something and not go back. And we still talk. Um, but I, if I said, yeah, there is one that I still regret that I haven't been able to make up for, it's that one. So,
Is there something holding you back? I feel like we're left at a cliffhanger here.
oh, well, he's married.
Oh, okay. Okay. I apologize. Yeah. That would make it challenging.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Um, so,
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough one.
yeah,
Is there things that you wish you would have done that you haven't done? Or you wish you can go back and maybe have taken a different road than the road that you took?
I mean, there are a few things that I probably wouldn't do now, like um, climb Mount Kilimanjaro.
Oh, why?
I am not sure that I have the stamina to get to the peak, but I think there maybe 10 or 15 years ago I did,
Okay.
and I sometimes wish I had done that. But what I've done in the last 20, 25 years of my life or really more 10 years now that my kids are grown, I travel a lot. So I miss not seeing a lot of places, and now I get up and go. I've seen the aurora borealis. I've been to China. I've been to North Vietnam, South Vietnam, which is now Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Singapore. Um, as I mentioned, I've been to all the continents. I want to go back to places in Africa, and I want to go to Antarctica. I don't think I'll scuba dive anymore because it always scares me when, and as somebody said to me, there's just something a little wrong with putting on weights when you jump in the water.
It helps with the buoyancy.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And let me tell you, I'm probably one of the most buoyant people around. I mean, I'm not overweight. I am uh, like a balloon in a parade. Uh, I have been, people had to hold me down. In one of my scuba diving courses, we were supposed to drop our weight belt, control our ascent to the surface, and then dive back down and get our weight belt. I could not break the water. I
Oh,
could
wow.
not get back down. And they got tired, okay, we have a whole class to go through. So somebody said, I'm uh, go down, with this rope. And I tried and I couldn't get down. So they finally said, okay, we're going to bring you down. And it took more than one person to grab
Wow.
me and get me down. And when they got me down, they were trying to get my weight belt back on me. Parts of my body were like flying, like escaping. And one guy said, you knocked my mask off 3 times. And I'm like, I had no control. I mean, it was just like my body wanted to float back up. And when I looked down, you have an extra regulator
Mhm.
give to
On the
somebody
left
else.
side.
Yeah, yeah. And that extra regulator, I had my regulator, but the extra regulator was under my weight belt. And I told them, this is not good. And they turned around and they said, you're okay. Do not take off the weight belt. And I was the talk of the evening that night.
Did you get your scuba diving license?
I did. And I've,
I didn't know
yeah,
that. I
yeah,
learned something new.
advanced license and I'm nitrox certified.
Wow. I've my basic open water.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's quite a world down there.
that is very different. Is there something that you wish you would have done differently?
Well, there was one day when I was going to take flying lessons on a seaplane, and I decided I was living in Philadelphia not to go into New York and see a Gustav Klimt show that had a lot of privately held pieces. And I still regret that.
Hmm.
But I try to leave my regrets to things that can be fixed. Like I say, I spent a while of my life saying, oh, I didn't do this and I didn't do that, I didn't do the other. And I spent a part of my life saying, waiting for the future to happen. And now I've decided, you know what? If you want something to happen, make it happen.
Great
And
segue. So, what are your future plans?
I think I will. probably work here for another 3 years. And then I'll probably do some locums tenens, which is for those people who aren't in medicine. You fill in for pathologists who are taking vacation in small practices. And I will keep traveling as long as my legs keep walking. And I want to go to India. I haven't been to India yet. And I've been to several countries in Africa, but I want to go back to Botswana and go on a camping journey through some of the safari parks. And I want to go to Antarctica. I think I mentioned that. And
Those they sound like ambitious plans. So India sounds like it's at the top of the list.
India's at the top of the list, and it's probably one of the most doable. Antarctica costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
The last time I looked, I saw you make a choice between going on a trekking journey where you actually will trek into some of the uh, historical campsites. And um, I don't know, part of me wants to do that, and part of me is like, you know what, I think I'll just stay around the edges and watch the penguins. I used to want to be a number one Scrabble player, but after I joined a Scrabble association and realized I would never be as good as them, um, I I went through a period of having like 4 cups of espresso before I went in,
Oh my God.
practicing 2 and 3 letter words for an hour in the morning, of drinking less wine the night before. And one day I won 4 out of my 5 games and I never went back. I said, okay, I did it. But there are people there who take 7 letters and make up words.
Mm.
Because I was asking someone, how did you get to be the best Scrabble player in the state of Texas? Well, she says, I take 7 letters and I just make up as many words as I can and I write them on index cards. And I said, and how many index cards do you have? She said, 27,000. And I thought, I'm, I am not, I either don't have the attention span or I have too many other interests.
I like the latter rather than the former.
Yeah, yeah. I'll probably
That
go
sounds good.
art lessons.
Art
I used
lessons.
to have to get back into painting. Yeah.
Okay. What kind of painting do you do?
You
Nature,
know,
surrealism.
people
Okay.
like and some nature and a little bit of surreal, but not much. I have actually thought of trying to get into that, but I have to let all my OCD parts go.
I think people, from my understanding, is the hardest, and that was the obsession with Von Yu, right? Like he was obsessed with drawing people because they're the hardest to draw, from my understanding. This is coming from a very non-technical artist over here. I'm not even an artist. I can't draw a circle if I tried.
Well, and I'll say I think some of my best artwork are actually watercolors,
Hmm.
but that is also an area that's one of the hardest. Uh, and just very hard to control. And my one of my teachers told me, if 1 out of 25 looks good, you're doing good.
Wow.
Uh, but
It sounds like you have this lineage for trailblazing in your family from was it your great aunt that was the first doctor in
my
your
grandmother,
grandmother? Yeah,
yeah,
first doctor in South Texas.
the first Hispanic female physician in South Texas.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, you guys have a lineage of trailblazing women. So,
yeah,
I mean, you're picking up the most complicated, most complex things. That's very impressive.
it's fun. It makes life interesting, and it makes
I,
you
I think I've
it.
tried art too many times and I failed miserably for me to even contemplate this the idea of painting for the near future.
Yeah, I have a daughter who's a very talented artist, and and her father also painted, and and her grandfather on her father's side, and so she gets it from both sides, and she's very good.
She should sell it on Etsy.
Yes,
Why not? Seriously, you have a lot of them laying around. You could definitely make an extra buck on Etsy.
Yeah, I do have them laying around. I need to put them up in my house. Yep.
Yeah, there you go. Now to the second portion of the discussion. These are more rapid fire sort of questions for you, just to dig down deeper into things maybe we didn't discuss. But I'm curious, what is the best advice you've ever received?
You know what it is? Actually, it's something that a professor of mine told me in college. Never ask somebody to write you a letter of recommendation if you don't know that they will write you a good letter of recommendation. And I give that advice to other people also. So it's like knowing your mentors, knowing what people will say about you. And that's part of that is knowing the other person. Okay.
I will say on a tangent to that, I will say that I worked with someone and they were asked to write a letter by a medical student that they didn't know well. And they happened to tell me that they're going to write a bad letter. And not that I personally think that's the way they should have approached the situation, but their rationale for doing this is exactly like what you're describing. They're like, they don't know me well enough. If they don't know the quality of the letter I'm writing, they shouldn't have asked. Personally, I would have just said, hey, I don't know you well enough. I think, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that's solid advice. Yeah. Moving forward, what advice would you give to someone, or what's the best piece of advice you'd give to someone?
Well, I do wish I had worked out that relationship. So don't turn your back on something before you've actually decided that you're taking the right next step. I guess it's a way of saying don't be rash and don't burn your bridges. Uh,
Relationships are tricky though. Sometimes, like in the moment, you feel like you're making a rational, conscious decision. And then even if you have regrets, like either they've moved on or life has moved on, and the difference is too great to draw a bridge. How would you?
well, I mean, I would say as a corollary of that is don't make a decision if you're not in a good place. So, to take an example from my life, um, when I got divorced, I wasn't in a good place. And I was thinking, I'm going to quit this job. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go there. I'm going to do the other thing, blah, blah, blah. And somebody said, you know what? You should just sit down and let your life normalize again and then decide what you want to do. And that's an important thing to know. And again, that's a part of not making rash decisions. I think it's fun to make life-changing decisions, can be, but make sure you're in a good place when you make them. And then my other thing I tell everybody is, look, you don't know where you don't like where you are now, you don't like your job or your something something. You can do anything for a year, renewable for up to 5 years. And if in 5 years you still don't like it, then you've given it the test. But give it a year and maybe renew.
I like that.
Yeah.
Um, and then what advice would you give yourself as a child, adolescent, and as an adult if you can go back in time?
Oh, I would say stop worrying about being ostracized. Life gets better as you get older.
Okay. For all of them, it would be the same piece of advice.
um, it's certainly yeah, I think so. In fact, what I've found is I really enjoy being in my 60s.
Okay.
I'm almost in my 70s, and I can say a lot of things and get away with it. So as your edit button stops working, enjoy it.
I like that. I like,
And there are people who are pessimists and there are people who are optimists. I like to be an optimist. I have one other piece of advice for people. Learn, how to be happy and nice. Because when you're old and you're in a nursing home and you're happy and nice, even if you don't know who you are, all the nurses will love you and they'll take care of you. If you're mean, like those nuns from Ireland, you will not be taken care of.
That is good advice. And then professionally, what advice would you give to up and coming medical students, residents, or even pathology residents, or early in career practicing pathologists? You could break it down,
Be
or it could be lump sum. Up to you.
honest when you don't know something.
Okay,
Don't be a cowboy. Be honest.
that is good advice. I'll keep that in the back of my pocket in the coming years
Yeah.
when I start practicing. And then to family and friends.
Same thing I said about being nice.
No, that's completely fair. I mean, you can have one piece of advice that covers all of them.
It's as I'm getting older, I tell all my girlfriends and boyfriends or friends who are women and friends who are men, be nice because when you get in a habit of being nice and saying something nice back, it's not just in the moment that you feel that it will make you feel better, but if that becomes your reflexive action, it'll work for you when you need to be taken care of by somebody else. I guess it's a corollary of treat others as you want to be treated.
I like it. Um,
Uh, I would say to my children, I'm glad that I've taken them down to Rio Grande City, to parts of to parts of Mexico when I still went to Mexico, to someone's house who was a essentially a peasant farmer, and sat down and ate with them so that they know that people are people and they all deserve dignity and respect.
I like it. On a complete different topic, given the choice of anyone in the world, who would you want to have dinner with, dead or alive?
Oh, I have been asked that before, and one of them would be Leonardo da Vinci.
And I don't think I've ever heard someone say that. Why?
Um, I mean, he was an artist, he was a scientist, he had drawings of how to make men fly. He studied anatomy, and it made him a better artist. I think he was an absolutely fascinating person. And I had to write a book report in school one time, and it had to be a book report from a biography. And I read his biography, and I think I was about 14, and I just about cried to think that I would never meet this person. It just, he so impressed me.
Who's someone you admire?
Oh, now I admire Barack Obama.
Why?
I think he is a kind person and a very smart person. I think he managed a presidency as the first Black president carefully. And for those people who say he didn't do enough, I say he really had a difficult um, road there. And I liked his humility. I liked the fact that he would say, "This was my fault," or he would apologize to somebody. I think those are wonderful aspects of his personality.